Happy Monday and welcome all in for another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. That's Thomas Dunn. And we've got a lot to get into. We're going to obviously preview what we're going to see this coming week. We'll start doing a little bit of the recaps. We'll talk some resumes. Before we get going, be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening to the show. Follow along on social media at unofficial WCC pod. We are now all done with football season. The Super Bowl happened just over the weekend, which means we are done with that sport. And for those who have not been paying attention, who have not been locked in, welcome all over to college basketball season, because we are now only a month away from the WCC tournament. We are a month and change away from Selection Sunday and the NCAA tournament. We are in crunch time, and this is going to be a really, really fun end to the WCC regular season.
Well, according to Zach's attire when we're recording this, you're ready for spring training, apparently.
Well, it's what tomorrow is pitchers and catchers begin to report. So yeah. Baseball is here, but in the meantime, we've still got tons of college basketball.
Yeah, it's getting to be let's get down. I mean, it's been getting down to business time, in all honesty, for a lot of these WCC schools. But now you get into the final stretch run, find a way. Like, that has to be the theme for a bunch of these teams, and that goes for the two teams that are on the bubble in St. Mary's and Santa Clara, and that goes for all the teams in the fourth place bar fight trying to get that last spot into the WCC tournament quarterfinals. And you see on the ticker below, lots of teams within 2.5 games of each other, 4 through really 11. Is kind of a pig fest. There's no room separating any of them. You lose to anybody on any given night, and your standing can just crater. So really intriguing to see what happens here in this last month and change of the season. There's some fan bases that are nervous, and there are other fan bases that are excited. And I'm very intrigued to see who kind of can rise up to the moment and maybe do something they haven't accomplished in some time, or others who just find a way to continue to elevate the standard that they're usually a part of. But, at least for me, Zach, one of those first things that stood out over the course of the weekend slate, I mean, St. Mary's put the whooping on USF. I mean, that was not particularly close. And you could consider the fact that USF had a chance, late first half. They're trailing, but they're in the game. And then St. Mary's takes the 11-point lead to the half. Gaels go on a 9-0 run to start the second half, and that is curtains on that. And, we talk about, what we say in preseason with our preseason rankings and the kind of what happens with certain prognostications of the team. I don't think I've personally had a bigger missed prediction than thinking USF could have won the league this year. They got submitted by St. Mary's by TKO. Massive credit to the Gaels for doing so in a game that could have been a threatening type of game, but they never let it really be that way. And that's a credit to Randy Bennett and staff for doing that and taking care of business like they have year over year for 2 decades plus now. And I know who you're going to talk. If you're going to talk about some of the same guys I'm going to talk about, but Josh Dent, assist to turnover ratio in 2 games against the Dons this season of 18 to 1. I mean, that is a crazy number. And then Andrew McKeever only averaging 16 rebounds in the 2 games versus the Dons. I mean, only 16, no biggie whatsoever. But those 2 guys, especially part of the focal point for why St. Mary's just steamrolled the Dons. Obviously, that doesn't go into the account of how they dominated on the interior, but I know we talked about this. USF's going to have to really look inwards about that roster construction, because yes, you can want to stretch big all you want, but you got to pound inside, and USF outside of David Fuchs is just there's not much of any help whatsoever in that department.
I mean, for St. Mary's, you kind of took the win against San Diego on Wednesday kind of with a grain of salt, just because, of course, that's a team they should be able to dominate coming off the Gonzaga loss. But the fact they then followed that up with a game against a struggling USF team, not quite the Dons team we thought we would see, but still really put it to this team early on and just ran away with it in that second half. They dominated the paint. You mentioned that 44-14 points in the paint in this one. Paulos Morauskas, 20 points, 8 rebounds. You mentioned Dent. You mentioned McKeever. The other thing I think it's of note, this week we've seen a good week, back-to-back games from Mikey Lewis. 15 points, 4 of 6 from 3. This was second straight game where he's had a good night. And against San Diego, He had 10 points. He only played 16 minutes in that one, but 2 for 4 from 3. So we also did get to see some good notes out of him as well. And for St. Mary's, again, like they're doing what they need to do right now, which is going to kind of be the theme of not only what St. Mary's is doing, but what Santa Clara is doing, what Gonzaga is doing. You kind of have to handle the business that you need to do these next few weeks, because once you end up with the matchups against each other, that is going to be, at least for definitely for St. Mary's and Santa Clara, could be a tipping point, whether you're in or out of March Madness. And so looking at what we have here, looking at what St. Mary's has done, they absolutely just took care of business, what they needed to do. Dylan Shaw, 11 points, 9 rebounds, coming off his first double-double on Wednesday. So St. Mary's taking care of what they needed to take care of. And going to head up a little bit north to what happened up in Corvallis on Saturday, as Gonzaga was trying to come off the loss to Portland. And so for those who did miss that, Portland upset Gonzaga on Wednesday last night. So the Zags were going to be coming in a lot more focused. They're going to be coming upset. And no were they upset. And Graham Ike leading that charge. 35 points for the big man against Oregon State. And yes, this game was pretty close at halftime, but in the second half, Gonzaga pulled away in this one at Gill Coliseum. And the second half looked much more like the Zag team we have seen throughout the course of the year, as opposed to what we saw in the first half.
Yeah, tight game in the first half. And then Graham Ike, like you mentioned, I mean, staking his claim continuously after a good performance against St. Mary's, despite that roadblock at Portland. Player of the year. Like, I mean, I don't really, as much as good as Polis Morauskas has been, I think it's a 2-horse race between them. I mean, Graham Ike is a guy who can put his team on his back, and I think he really showed that at Oregon State, and deserves massive credit for a way that, in the Zags as a team, really rebounded from that loss against Portland. You can tell Murphy really lit a fire under them for that performance, or really the lack of care that they had against the Pilots, to the tune of tying a program record. Only 2 turnovers like that. Like, I don't care how good you are as a team, like, regardless, you could be Arizona for all I care. And 2 turnovers as a team is damn good. And a massive credit to the Zags for, I think, having the mental focus more than anything of just staying locked in against a team that, one, they lost to last year in that building, but 2, it's like, okay, what are we going to look like now when we face some sort of adversity, especially the ones that you're not expecting? It's one thing to, lose against Michigan and see what the Wolverines have been doing throughout the bulk of their season, but it's another thing to do it against the Pilots, who are now surging themselves, but to do it in the sense of you were not ready to go for that game. And how did they respond? They responded very well, especially in that second half. Mark Few mentioned post game that it's not, the prognosis isn't necessarily great for where Braden Huff is in terms of his recovery. He's out back home in Chicago area, getting his recovery going on. And at least for me, I would probably not likely see him the rest of the regular season, is what my read is. WCC tournament, maybe. That seems like the earliest that they'd get him back. And even then, that's probably kind of a stretch. So Gonzaga continuing to find a way to almost reinvent themselves in a certain sense without Braden Huff, and Graham Ike at the forefront of doing that.
Absolutely. And again, kind of mentioned that second half against Portland the other night, they allowed the Pilots to shoot 59% from the field. The first half against Oregon State wasn't all that great either, 54%, but that second half held the Beavers to 33% shooting. So a much better performance in that second half, fending off Oregon State, who had been on a little bit of a roll on their own. They had kind of wedged back up into that conversation on the 4 seed line. And they're still going to be in the mix of it. Oregon State is, but Gonzaga, you're right. It's like with Braden Huff, now looks like there's no timeline really for his return or what that's going to look like. They almost need to prepare for life in the NCAA tournament without Braden Huff at this stage. And because you don't know how long it's going to last, you don't know what that's going to look like. We're starting to see almost a window into their limitations now that we've had them for a few weeks without Braden Huff. And of course, we've also had them for a bit of time without Graham Ike. But this is a wildly different team when you don't have both of those dominant big men inside. The 3-point shooting has suffered. The offense has looked a little bit more of a shell of itself. So much more leans on Graham Ike. 39 minutes in that game against Oregon State for Ike. He is playing a heavy load for the Zags without his partner in crime, Braden Huff, alongside him. Now, we talked about the teams that are all kind of wedged up there at the top because we haven't talked about the first place team yet, and that is Santa Clara, as they went up to Washington State. And did they need every last bucket to get out of the Palouse alive, because that one was tight all the way to the end, but escaped with that 96-92 win.
And anybody who talked to me in the lead up to that game was like, I do not care what Washington State's record is. Like that game is prime. Oh boy, here we go. Let's just get out, just get out with the win territory, and that's exactly what happened. I was with a friend of the program, Greg Woods, here in the Bay Area for Super Bowl week, and I even told him, I'm like, look, I understand that Washington State has not been at the standard they're accustomed to in recent memory, but that game at Beasley Coliseum, despite even that 30-point win last season for the Broncos, like it gave you a little bit of the heebie-jeebies of, like, you've done so well and taking care of business elsewhere. Now can you find that last gear to get through this last week of games before you get what you want next Saturday? And that includes beating the Cougars, beating the Redhawks this upcoming Wednesday. And it was a arduous task at times. I mean, really back and forth the whole way. I mean, the Broncos got up 10 early in the second half. Washington State eventually corralled them back in. And I mean, as much as we're ready to crown Joel Foxwell Freshman of the Year, Alan Graves is making it very hard to officially put that award in the coffin. I mean, that dude, this is not really basketball coded analysis, but that dude changed my life. Like, that dude he is him. Alan Graves is him. And I think it's crazy when you read it in the sense of he doesn't start, and in a weird way, I don't want him to. Like, Buki, the way this platoon works, because Buki Boye is more often than not in foul trouble, it works. And it doesn't necessarily, I guess, one of the first times I've actually believed when coaches say it doesn't matter who starts, it matters who finishes. And Alan Graves, more often than not, is in the closing lineup, but really dominated throughout the bulk of the game. You saw the lower third of 30 points, 13 rebounds, past the freshman record for most steals in a single season in program history. And I mean, I don't know if I'm going to have to seriously start considering that Alan Graves may be going to the NBA after the season, or at least test the waters in doing so. But I'm seeing a lot more discourse online about it as opposed to my personal narrative on it. So I think it's something that's now going to have to get into my mind that I wasn't necessarily expecting. But I mean, he was flat out phenomenal on a consistent basis. And Santa Clara, like you mentioned, they needed every last bit of it, because it was a barn burner up in the Palouse. Massive credit to Ace Glass, Emily Yalaho, Rehards, Vavers, and Andy Okafor. They gave a hell of an effort. David Riley's team came ready to play. They just didn't have enough juice at the end of the day. But Broncos got what they needed. Now they have one more game to take care of business before they got everything they want right in front of them.
30 points, 13 rebounds, 4 assists in 25 minutes.
Yeah,
the impressive part from Alan Graves in this one. Yep. Christian Hammond had 16 for him, 11 from Buki Boye. So again, you got 41 from the center spot in that game. So massive game for Santa Clara to get out of there, remain in first place. And of course, all these games, everything we're seeing is the prep for what we're going to see in March. And specifically, both Santa Clara and St. Mary's are fighting for their tournament lives at this stage. We talked over the weekend with Rocco Miller about kind of where these two teams are, and started kind of pulling the numbers of where each of these teams fit into that bracket picture and what that's going to look like, because it is razor thin. St. Mary's is anywhere between like a 9, which is where Rocco has them, down to an 11 as a play-in. Santa Clara is kind of an 11 almost across the board, but it's varying. Some have them as a play-in, some of them have Santa Clara in, but guess what? They're in almost every bracket. Again, like, I know the Santa Clara folks are not going to want to, like, you can't jump for joy yet. You can't celebrate it yet, because there's still a lot of basketball to play. But right now, both these teams have kind of are doing what they need to do. They both have challenges coming up. Obviously, with Gonzaga coming to the Levy Center on Saturday, that is a big one. But I mean, I keep thinking about what we're seeing the rest of the way. Every time you think that Santa Clara is going to hit that bump in the road, they've been able to avoid it at this stage. Like, especially in conference play, they've been able to avoid it. St. Mary's is kind of doing their normal thing. They handle their business against the teams that they're supposed to take care of. But looking at even the games going up, I'm like Seattle U coming to the Levy Center. I don't think that's going to necessarily be an easy one because Seattle U has been pesky. Even though they haven't necessarily played all that well in the last month, they nearly they let one get away at Portland the other night, and that's a guard that's a guard position, a guards with Brayden Maldonado that you have to keep in check. Junsuk Yo has also played really well as of late. You're going to have to keep him in check if you're Santa Clara. But I mean, both these squads, it's handle your business and see what happens against each other, because really the games that are going to flip, whether they are absolutely in or going to be really, really worried on Selection Sunday, are going to be the times they play each other, which is not for a few weeks. And the two times that these two teams play Gonzaga, one this weekend at Santa Clara, and then one at the end of the regular season in Moraga for St. Mary's, and Gonzaga won last time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the buck for both the Gaels and the Broncos starts with what can you do against teams that are not Gonzaga and each other. And I think both Santa Clara and St. Mary's have games in this upcoming week where you're playing those pesky-esque teams. And you mentioned Seattle U. Seattle U, I'll make sure I think their conference record, if I'm not mistaken, 4-8 right now, but they are not a 4-8 team to me. I think to you too. I think you would agree with those sentiments given what we've seen in the bulk of their work. I think they've just had some getaway, to be quite honest, and especially in terms of the way their scheduling is worked out and timing. I don't think they'll want to hear the name Dante Sensori Hercules for quite some time over in the Pacific Northwest. But I mean, Chris Victor can coach his tail off. I mean, if I'm a Broncos fan, I'm not taking that Seattle U game lightly at all. You mentioned what Brayden Maldonado can do. I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. And for St. Mary's, yes, you play Pepperdine first, but I'm looking at that game at Pacific. They've only lost one game at home, and this is not your older brother's Pacific anymore. This is Dave Smart is doing a lot of good things and really made Pacific more than just a pesky team. Like, they're a team that can legit win. They're a team that still has a winning record, both in conference and overall. And it's not easy. I think that's the best way I could put it. Playing at Pacific is not easy. St. Mary's gonna have to bring at the very least their A- game, I think, to make sure that they can win going away. And we'll see how that kind of shakes out, understandably, while acknowledging that Pepperdine is still earlier in the week. But those are the two games I have squared in terms of take care of business before you actually get to have the opportunities that you want.
Yeah, I mean, the game against Pacific, I just think about how good that squad has been from taking really on the glass all season long. And of course, it's what you have to be able to do against St. Mary's. And so I'm kind of looking at Isaac Jack. I'm looking at that front line for Pacific and seeing what they can do against St. Mary's. Now, that kind of leads us into what we saw from the rest of that crew, like, because we have the mess for the 4 seed, Pacific, USF, Washington State, Oregon State. And you know what? I'm going to just give Portland a little bit of credit in here because they are starting to sneak into that conversation, and maybe they actually have the schedule that's going to help them out most when it comes to that. Because, I mean, we saw very different results from this group. We saw USF, Washington State, Oregon State. We've talked about all three of them, how all three of them picked up losses, have dropped one game behind Pacific. And Pacific, they did kind of the exact opposite. They took care of business on Saturday, taking care of I'm blanking on who they played on Saturday. Scroll. Pepperdine, hitting the road at Pepperdine again. Like, they hadn't played very well on the road most of the season, and the fact that they were able to kind of do that, I think, was a great kind of showing that they not only can handle the business, but really do it in style. 92-59 against the Waves, just ran away from them. And then the other one who picked up a win in dramatic fashion again was Portland, winning at the tip. And you mentioned the hero in that one, because this was an ugly game from Portland, but they did just enough to hang around. They won 54-53 in this one, won on a tip on the buzzer. And I was almost screaming at my TV because they had the layup.
Yeah.
That should have been the game winner. And then when that was botched, having Dante Sensori Hercules on the other side just to tip that in, just the roller coaster of emotions at the very end of that game was wild. And now Portland's won a couple straight games. They're feeling good about themselves. This is going to be a lot of fun toward the end because there are 5 teams all separated by what? It's 2 games of each other with 3 weeks to go. And I'm not sure who's going to come out of this pack.
Man, you think I know who's going to come out of this pack? I don't think so. I don't have a great read either on this because so many teams can just kind of jump up and grab you and like drag you back in. Like we were ready to write off LMU for dead, and here they come with a nice week win at USF, and then you go down and they put the whooping on San Diego, starting out that game on a 17-0 run. And at least for me, Portland, I mean, one of the essential questions that we were asking in the live was, can they sustain the momentum? Can they make that more of a flash in the pan? And that's kind of part of the things that teams can't necessarily do after they play Gonzaga. What's the response like? We've seen so many other teams across the league give so much of an effort there, and then they have nothing left in the tank. This could have easily been a game where Seattle U kind of just suffocated them into submission, and in some cases kind of did over the course of the game. But I mean, I want to give a massive credit to James O'Donnell for the stretch of play that he's had recently, because this is nothing that we saw last year when he was with the Dons. And I think, well, it's one thing to give credit to Shante Leggett for unlocking him, but I think for O'Donnell to continue to have the confidence to come ready to go and ready to play over the course of the season, I think that deserves massive props. And I definitely would not, I would have felt really like, I would have felt for Jermaine Balasegar-Webb had that tip in not gone, because he had that tip in, he had that layup. He had it. I definitely would have felt for him on that one, but sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And Portland was in the right spot at the right time. And, you know, the Pilots, I mean, this is kind of a trend with Shante Leggett when you take a look at the grand scheme of things. Like, they do tend to play better over the course of the season, especially in recent memory. Like, they've had some really rough non-con, some really rough start of conferences, but by the time they roll around, they're playing better basketball. Are they sitting here challenging like Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Santa Clara year over year? Not necessarily, but they can come up and grab you kind of like they have in recent games. And when you look at their next stretch of games, like the Pilots, I mean, at San Diego, home against Pepperdine, at Seattle U, I mean, 4 of these last 5 games are entirely gettable, I think, for the Pilots. Now, it's going to be very difficult to do so when I look at the remaining schedules, as was flashing on the bottom of the screen. I guess I'm kind of earmarking Oregon State, I think, probably has the most viable path if you want to look at, I mean, lack of what could have been blowouts, I guess, so to speak. I guess that's the best way I could frame it right now. But it's not like the Wayne Tinkle teams are a beacon of excellence on the road either. So everybody's guess who reads this is as good as mine.
Right. I mean, all these teams, I mean, you kind of roll through. Pacific has LMU, St. Mary's, at Washington State, at Gonzaga, USF, Oregon State, at USF, at Seattle, Pepperdine, San Diego, at Santa Clara, USF, Oregon State, at San Diego, Gonzaga, Santa Clara, at Pacific. I mean, Washington State still has Gonzaga, St. Mary's left. They do have Pepperdine on that schedule. At LMU, they have Pacific. Portland, mentioned already, at San Diego, Pepperdine, at Seattle, at Gonzaga, at San Diego. All these teams, like, it feels they have varying levels of what could happen, because now Portland probably has the best road because they have the most viable, like, quote unquote, the easiest schedule left. Yeah. And I think that's one thing to look at what Portland has done. I don't think I've seen enough of good Portland over the course of the season to necessarily say Portland is the team I would say is going to make that leap. But on the flip, and I think there's 2 almost traps in here, because I look at what Pacific has left, and I look at what Washington State has left, and obviously you're going to go, well, both of them have St. Mary's left. Both of them have Gonzaga left, which obviously is rough. They also do have to play each other as well. Both of them have LMU on that schedule, and that's the team that, as they have now picked up 2 straight wins and done it in dominant fashion in both of them, they now feel like they can play the spoiler and crash the party a bit and ruin that opportunity for some of these teams. Maybe ruin it for Pacific, maybe ruin it for Washington State, and drag them back into the pack after what we've seen them do. Jalen Shelley, great week this past week, 27 points on Wednesday, 24 more on Saturday. And I think the one other thing is, I keep looking at how many road games each of these teams have, and I'm going to play a little bit of a guessing game here, because I pulled the road records for those 5 teams. So Pacific, Oregon State, USF, Washington State, and Portland. So just those 5. None of them are very good on the road. Let's just say that. All of them have awful road records. But two of 2 of them have 1 total road win this season. And so who are the 2? One of them is 1-8. One of them is 1-9. Who are the teams that have really, really struggled away from home?
Survey says it is actually the Washington State Cougars at 1-8 and the Portland Pilots at 1-9 on the road. If you guys were expecting those types of guesses and everything, but it's not like some of these other teams have been beacons of excellence on the road. Either USF is 2-7, and I know we'll let you argue for the rest of them, Zach. But I think going just to tie in what you were saying about LMU, they're playing themselves back into, I would say, the second round conversation. Because they're trying to get out of that day one. I mean, 9-12 are in day one. LMU trying to play their way out of that. And I think equally as much as the 4 seed matters, I think that kind of battle between 7 and 9 is also amplified just as much in this type of fight, because nobody wants to be the team that says, "Yep, guys, let's go sign up for 6 games in 6 days and go get ourselves a NCAA tournament bid." So I think that for me is I'm looking at kind of both lenses along that front.
I mean, LMU is only 1 game out of getting out of that opening round. So it's not like LMU is that far away. They're only 1 game behind Portland for that 7 spot. Seattle is sitting only a half game behind them. So you have Portland, Seattle, and LMU are all only separated by 1 full game. And San Diego's still right there too. I think I feel like San Diego's kind of going the opposite direction right now as far as the way they have played as of late, especially considering it was also San Diego who got rolled by LMU just the other night. I mean, LMU started that game on a 17-0 run. Of looked up and it was like, well, this game's over real fast in that one. I mean, we have seen some wild shifts in the course of what's been going on underneath those top 3 teams, because no one has really separated themselves. No one has really been able to kind of hold on to what we've seen. I mean, I do think that Pacific seems to be trending in the right direction. Portland is trending in the right direction. I mean, if I'm going to look at just off their play, who I think is going to be able to hold on, it feels like maybe it's Pacific, but sneakily looking at what we've seen, I mean, Oregon State they've actually been a lot better on the road. They're 3-5 away from Gill Coliseum. And we talked about how last year they were just awful away from home. Well, they're not completely awful away from home this year. They've been at least more competent on the road. They've been able to take it on the road a little bit better and have picked up some good wins. And you look at who they have on the road in these last few games. I mean, thinking about the fact that in those last at USF, that's probably doable the way USF has played. At Seattle U, probably doable considering the way they've played. Now they do finish off at Santa Clara, probably not there, but I think there is some level of an opportunity now that they're done with Gonzaga. That's out the way. They don't need to worry about that anymore. And what they're going to be able to do the rest of the way, both Pepperdine, San Diego on the schedule. Oregon State might be the one who's able to climb out of that because they've been a little bit better on the road. And the schedule does seem a bit softer the rest of the way.
All that, and I definitely see the lens you're coming from with the Beavers and everything, but I think when you look at towards the last week of the season, I know it's a long way away considering where we are. I mean, USF at Pacific, like that, you just kind of circle that kind of right now and say, look, like that could be your battle on the final day of the regular season to try and get that 4 seed and everything along those lines. I do hear you on that Oregon State thing. Washington State, for me, it kind of hinges on how good, what version of LMU they kind of see when they go on the road there. I think it's kind of a fool's errand at times for us to kind of project on some of these teams what we're going to get on a game-to-game basis, but they definitely have like a really hard schedule, like at Gonzaga, against Pacific, against St. Mary's, and then you get your reprieve, for whatever version of LMU shows up, and then you play Pepperdine, your last game of the regular season. So as I mentioned at the start of this segment, everybody's guess in the comments is as good as ours. I can't wait for us to look really wrong and stupid because and
I have picked so many of these games, especially with all these teams. I feel like I have been awful at picking the WCC teams this year, especially in that grouping, because you're right. It's like who knows what we get on a night in, night out basis from this group. We've seen some highs, we've seen some lows, but the one thing that we can say, it's like there's they don't leave you with anything less than being entertained by this group, because like you just don't know what you're going to get from any one of them on a given night. And now that we're going to kind of get to see all of these teams really kind of like it's do or die now for all of them. How they play these last few weeks is going to separate them, and only one of them is going to get that spot into the quarterfinal round. And whoever ends up with it is going to feel really good about getting out of this pack.
Yeah, they're gonna. I think it's gonna be like someone with a bloody like Randy Marsh from South Park saying, "I ain't hear no bell." Once they find a way to get out of that bar fight, if you will. That's what I've been describing it as all season. So it's crazy when we look back at our preseason power rankings and where we thought these teams would finish. I think we thought there would be more of a spread than there actually was. And yes, while we can have a team that we say we project to finish 10th, that actually finishes like 5th, it's not like the difference was all that much. So that's really very fascinating when I look back at everything along that. Like there are some teams we've gotten very wrong. Like don't get me wrong on that front, but like just in general.
I will say this though, the one thing we did agree upon is that the middle of this league was going to be a bar fight. We knew that going in. We may not have completely mispicked on who was going to be in the bar fight, but we knew it was going to be a bar fight in the middle of the league. That the top was kind of set. We picked the wrong third team.
Oh yeah.
But everyone else it's kind of played to an extent how we thought. Just the who and the faces that are involved in the fight switched up a bit from our predictions before the year. Now, thinking about what is coming up on Wednesday, because we've got a full slate of games this week. I said on Wednesday. It's not just Wednesday. This week is broken up. We've got 1 on Tuesday, we've got 4 on Wednesday, and 1 on Thursday. Washington State at Gonzaga on Tuesday night, Portland at San Diego, LMU at Pacific, Pepperdine at St. Mary's, and Seattle U at Santa Clara on Wednesday. Then Thursday, Oregon State at San Francisco. I mean, any one of these games is going to be really fascinating. And let's just start with the game tomorrow night, Washington State at Gonzaga, because I feel like Washington State has just continued to, like, they've been knocking on the door. We've seen some highs, we've seen some lows, and Gonzaga, while they have played, obviously they played better on Saturday against Oregon State. I feel like they haven't truly kind of like looked like themselves really for probably a few weeks.
I hear you on that last bit, but I would push to the direction of they're not going to look like themselves when you don't have Braden Huff. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. I don't know that it's necessarily fair to ding them that way. I do think what you can say is what you can control is that effort. And the reason why we lambasted them so hard against Portland is that, yes, you didn't have Braden Huff, but you also didn't show up. And like that can't happen. So when you look at these other games, like at Oregon State, was it sexy? Not necessarily at points, but they did what they had to do. They put their imprint on the second half, ran going away. So St. Mary's kind of put their imprint in the second half, eventually got on those a series of mini bursts to put the Gaels away. So when I look at this game against Washington State, that was the first game that they didn't have Braden Huff the whole season. And it was really Jalen Worley and Adam Miller that I thought were like the key cogs in getting things going for the Zags. Obviously, Graham McKay sitting there, 23, 11, and 5, not too shabby for considering his lines along that game. But Washington State they got put on the back foot kind of midway through that first half and couldn't necessarily recover. But what I will say is, can they kind of take that offensive momentum that they had against Santa Clara and kind of apply that to the Kennel? Obviously, not easy task whatsoever in that regard. It's a young team in certain spurts for the Cougs. And when I say that, I specifically look at the lens of Ace Class. Can he be the guy that, can he withstand kind of what the noise is like, what this environment's like? It's going to be one of the best environments, if not the best, that the Cougs have played in all season, and kind of how they kind of look at and maneuver themselves throughout those bursts. So I'm not sure it's entirely fair to say that Gonzaga hasn't looked like themselves, at least from the specific lens you're talking at, but I do hear what you're trying to say more than anything. And it's going to be a very hard task for Washington State. I think their record isn't necessarily indicative of how well they've played or how good they've played, but it doesn't mean that they should be challenging for the top 3 either. I just think they just had some ones get away.
Yeah, I mean, now the last matchup, Gonzaga won 86-65, so this was one down at Beasley Coliseum, and Gonzaga really kind of had their way early on in that one. Greg Mike had 23 and 11. I mean, one of the things I think one of the keys is going to be just how long Andy Okafor can stay on the floor. Like he fouled out in that game. He only played 12 minutes in that first matchup. Again, this was no Braden Huff Gonzaga. So this was a version of the Zags that this team has already seen. Going up the kennel obviously makes it that much tougher. If Andy Okafor can stay out of foul trouble, probably that will give them a better shot at this, but it's also Washington State team that's going to have to shoot the three well in this one. I mean, even in the last one, they still shot 13 for 28. So it wasn't bad from distance. What they're just going to have to do is be consistent throughout the course of the game because they only shot 40% for the whole contest in that one.
Yeah, and I think Washington State, they really got a big lift from Simon Hildebrandt in that one, and they're going to obviously need a lot more of that and then some in this return matchup over in Spokane. And at least for me, for Washington State's kind of, I guess, stock, so to speak, I think I really want to see the level of competitiveness they've had, because they've had some really, I'd say, sneaky good competitive games this season. You look at St. Mary's, I thought they were in that for the bulk of the game. Gonzaga, not necessarily a good showing, but when they played Santa Clara, they did well. USF, they had that one slip away. So at least for me, it's like, what can you show me in terms of the competition standpoint to try and get yourself eventually through this stretch of games where it's pretty brutal for Washington State, all things considered, and especially when you look at their fight for fourth place. When we talk about not easy, I think their schedule is chief among it.
Yeah. Now, one of the others that's happened on Wednesday, I'm staring at LMU and Pacific because these two going in similar directions, and Pacific dropped the game at LMU earlier in the year. And this is going to be one that they're going to want back. They're going to want to have a better shot at this one. And of course, them being at home in the Spano Center is going to help in that matchup. But I mean, I think the one thing is you're going to have to just continue to contain what LMU can do on offense. LMU played well on that side of the ball last time around. They shot 49% for the game. They were 41% from three in that one. It was an MJ Amy game, 20 points for him in that first matchup. And for Pacific, I think they're going to need to play better defense. They're going to need to rebound it a little bit better. As well. I mean, they still were +8 in the rebounding column, but you've got to make sure that you're chasing LMU off that 3-point line, because you let them get going and it can be a long night against the Lions.
Yeah, it can. And I think the thing is, at least for me, I was about ready to write off LMU like wholeheartedly. I thought they had at times in the last month had just quit. I thought the game at Seattle U, like while the final score isn't necessarily that indicative, I don't think that was indicative of how the game was set. I thought the two games against the Broncos, that was not great whatsoever. But then they responded very well at USF. They kicked the Dons into the dirt over on the hilltop. That is not an easy task to do. Then they go out, turn it around, and basically strangle San Diego into submission right off the bat. So a credit to the Lions for doing so. And I think when you look at Pacific's season to this point, that first weekend is really one that got away. Because you mentioned that game at LMU. I mean, at San Diego, right in that same weekend, where it's like, come on, like we want to invest in you, but then you put up a performance like that. And I'd be intrigued to see what Pacific, more than anything, is looking like in terms of, everyone likes to say their get back, or so to speak, but how do they look in terms of trying to get revenge against the Lions more than anything? Obviously, MJ Amy is point A, B, and C on the scouting report, so we'll see if the Tigers can crowd. They've been really good at home, especially on defense. So we'll see how that shakes out.
And then taking a look, I mean, we touched on it a little bit. Seattle U at Santa Clara, obviously, kind of like we can go pretty short on this one as far as like Santa Clara just needs to kind of, I think, control the paint and make sure that it doesn't really get any easy looks. Because I think that's something that has been fairly consistent with what Santa Clara has been able to do to this point. Like even Saturday aside, they've been good on the defensive side of the ball. They've been really good at defending the three for the most part. And the Seattle team has struggled on the boards. They have struggled I would say for most of conference play from the 3-point line. If you can continue to just make Seattle struggle in both of those areas, that should be enough to just make sure that the Broncos can get out of there with a win, even if this is going to be a little bit of a trickier matchup, really, for anybody in the conference.
Yeah, I mean, just find a way. I mean, that's really the theme of this week, going into Wednesday for if you're Santa Clara, just find a way to get it done. I think you mentioned, aside from Saturday and the way their defensive performances have been, I think they kind of the first like 5 or 10 minutes or so of that game, Santa Clara I thought was playing good defense. Just Washington State had like a ton of end of shot clock grenades that went in. More than anything, and that I think kind of set the tone for what the Cougars are doing, and eventually then Santa Clara started having those breakdowns. So I'd be intrigued to see where kind of Santa Clara, if they can set the tone defensively. You mentioned the paint battle. I think obviously that'll be chief among it. And then it's weird when you get these games late in the season when you're playing them for the first and only time. So the Broncos hadn't played Washington State, and they're not going to unless they see them in the tournament. Same thing with Seattle U. They have not seen them and aren't going to unless they play them in the conference tournament. I do think there's a little eeriness that can be involved in stuff like that because you're feeling each other out kind of right then and there. So I do want to see how Herb Sendek and company kind of change that around. I think KJ Cochran's had a really, and Alan Graves and Sash Lugov for that matter. I've been very harsh on Lugov at times this season, but I think that the trio of freshmen as a whole, I mean, they've had a stellar last month, and I think I'll be intrigued to see how they operate. I think it's no easy task playing a Chris Victor led team. I mean, just ask the Washington Huskies and Stanford Cardinals. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out over at the Levy Center.
St. Mary's and Pepperdine. I mean, the matchup last time, I think this was 72-45 the last time around. St. Mary's just completely suffocated the Waves in that one. They held them to, 34% from the field, 17% from three. Not a single player was in double figures for Pepperdine in that first matchup. So, I mean, St. Mary's has done a really good job of handling these sorts of teams. And as we've seen with both the San Diego game and the USF game, they have definitely been kind of on their P's and Q's since the Gonzaga loss. And the offense has really been kind of a big part of that, as that seems like it's just been humming for the last week plus.
Yeah, and I think if you're the Gaels, like going into playing the Waves, I think that at least for me, one of those like mini keys is keep Mikey Lewis in rhythm. Because that's a guy that you need as much as Polis Morauskas, Josh Dent, Andrew McKeever have had great seasons to this point in the year. Like Mikey Lewis is kind of someone who can really change the ceiling of this team, and it's been a long climb at times for him in his sophomore season. So can he keep him in rhythm, especially heading into that Pacific game? I think they may need him in that game. I'm not particularly worried about Josh Dent, Polis Morauskas, and Andrew McKeever. I think at least for me, the key for those, especially for the big guys in Wessels and McKeever, is what type of physicality you bring down the stretch of the season when you play those big dogs. I think when you play Gonzaga, when you play Santa Clara, what can you show me there? Because they kind of got their lunch taken from them in certain spurts of those games. So those two, the two big men, I'm not necessarily concerned with over the course of these next couple games. For me, it's more about the creation and the shot making more than anything. And my spotlight is on Mikey Lewis.
I think I might look at Harry Wessels in this one because I want to see some consistency from the big man. And because we've seen some ups, we've seen a lot more downs this season. And obviously he has been battling injury most of the year. He's pretty healthy at this point. But I think we need to see it on a more night in, night out basis. We didn't really get to see it against USF the other night. Andrew McKeever really kind of took that one over. We obviously didn't see it against Gonzaga. So I think we need to see, I would like to see more consistency from him. So starting tonight or starting on Wednesday night, kind of build off of that and really kind of get into a rhythm before you get to Santa Clara, before you get to Gonzaga, that last week of the regular season. I'm looking for him to be that defensive presence, but also a little bit more kind of more consistent and a viable option on the offensive end. I think at times like that's sometimes what he ends up being invisible, or he makes the silly turnover, whatever else, and that kind of forces him off the floor. Need to see that kind of just be cleaned up before they get to that last week of the season.
Yeah, I think totally fair along that front. And I think, especially from the lens of McKeever playing so well, it almost makes it, in a certain sense, you're like, okay, fine, we're not getting what we want from Harry. McKeever's doing fine. And I always think back to the game at USF. I think he played about 6 or 7 minutes total, just because Randy Bennett was just not happy on either end of the floor. So, I think the more that you kind of explain that and hear it out, I can see the reasoning for why you want to see more of Harry Wessels, because it's not just about, okay, what can you show me in that one game sample size when you play the Zags in Moraga, when you play the Broncos in Moraga? It's what can you show me in the lead up to it, because you need to have all viable options. What if McKeever gets in foul trouble early on in those first couple minutes that he gets on the floor off the bench? So I think I hear you a little bit more now on what Harry Wessels needs to bring to the table, because the expectations have been higher, and I don't know that he's necessarily met them this season.
So I think, yeah, just consistency there. I think that, again, it's not a one game sample size. It's what he can do, kind of building off of one game and getting close as we get deeper and deeper into the season. If he can be more again, this was someone who was picked to be a preseason all WCC first teamer. So if he can, I'm not necessarily hoping that he looks like that, but someone who is going to be a complementary piece, someone who can stay on the floor late in games. Again, that finishing lineup. If he's someone who can stay there on the floor at the end of games, that's what you want to be able to see from a Harry Wessels as we get down the stretch. And the one other one, I mean, San Diego, Portland is also happening there. I don't know if there's anything you want to kind of touch on there, because San Diego is still seems like it's sliding in the wrong direction. But Portland 1-9 on the road. It feels like they need to get something going away from the Child Center.
Yeah, easier said than done for a lot of these WCC teams away from home. And I think when you look at the San Diego game, for me, it's more about how the Toreros respond more so than what the Pilots do, because I think if you're San Diego, I mean, you have to have the worst taste in your mouth after you got knocked out right basically before the game started against LMU, and on your home floor, just can't happen. Like, it's one thing for Gonzaga to walk in there and own the place. It's another thing for LMU to walk in there, and that's a game you're expecting to be, for lack of a better phrase, to be a peer of and try and eke out a win, and you got pummeled. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So Portland, I mean, a part of the reasoning why they're not great on the road is because, I mean, they don't have any bodies. They don't have anybody to throw out there. And it's harder to play on the road and kind of dig deep and have the optionality if you're Shante Leggins. I mean, hell, he's on one Achilles right now. So it's hard even for the coach to find, the best version of what he needs. So for me, I think it's more about San Diego than as opposed to Portland and trying to reach deep into the energy tank. What version of the T Road shows up, I think, is gonna lead the charge for that one. And then we have obviously the last one this time on Thursday, and at least for me, I would say probably the most intriguing game of this initial slate, just because of what it dictates in terms of the battle for the 4 seed and trying to keep up with Pacific. Oregon State at USF, and I was really not a fan of the body language I saw from the Dons and Moraga. I think I just didn't like it. I don't really have a better way of saying it. When you're trying to look back and see what can we do, how can we get back in this game against St. Mary's, it's just like, I don't know. I didn't really see the spark I'm accustomed to seeing, and that was a little bit discouraging for me to watch. And I am intrigued to see how they respond against Oregon State, because they lost to the Beavers and Gill earlier this season. So they want to get their revenge on that. They want to get back into the 4 seed race and be the chief among it. So at least for me, I'm more or less concerned with how the Dons respond versus what the Beavers do. But that's not to say the Beavers have not been playing better basketball as of late.
They had a big second half in that one. They trailed 30-25 at the half, and then Oregon State took up. There must have been another milk chug or something, because they finished like in 45-32 in that second half, and was able to pull away in that one. Isaiah C had 18, Josiah Logan 14, Des White 11 and 6 and 8 in that one. They shot 47% from 3 in that first matchup. So Oregon State, again, they've been playing well, and they played a little bit better on the road this year than they did a year ago. So this is another kind of note to see how this Oregon State team really starts to kind of feel out this next matchup. Also, I think the one thing that he wasn't much of a factor in the first go round was Johan Munch, and he coming off not on Saturday, but on Wednesday, that big night, 18-15. So he's coming off of a bigger performance. So Oregon State going into the Hilltop is going to be fascinating. I think this feels like it's going to be a physical matchup between these two, because both of them need this game. Both of them have different reasons. Obviously, they want, like, USF wants to get back. They have to feel better about themselves after coming off the St. Mary's game. Also, because they did lose the first matchup to Oregon State. It feels like, not to kind of always put it on one person, but like this, I need the leaders of USF to lead this group. Ryan Beasley, Tyrone Riley, they need to look like the guys we thought we were going to see coming into the year. And because if they played obviously up to their level, if they play with confidence and with poise, like they'll be in this at the end against Oregon State. But to this point, the lack of consistency with both these squads is going to be just kind of the fascinating thing to see which one of them can kind of look closer to their best self, because you never know what either of these teams is going to bring on a given night.
Yeah, and it's alarming at times. And I think, at least for me, when I look at it from the USF perspective, I think when Beasley gets taken out of a game, I think it's more of a function of the backcourt construction than anything. When I look at Tyrone Riley, it's like you're a guy who we're supposed to be in NBA talks and everything, and you entered the portal and you had high majors looking at you, and you come back and sometimes like I'm not even noticing that you're on the floor, and like that's been my big problem with some of his play this season. So when you mentioned those two guys leading, yeah, I do need to see them lead, and I think while I do acknowledge that they're probably a function of two different things, I mean, at some point the rubber meets the road. You just got to get some results, and this is a game where you just need to win. Just got to find a way. And that's why I've mentioned that theme across several different games in this slate, and I'm going to really pound it for USF. Find a way, because it has been a rough go recently for the Dons.
All right, and it is also round 2 of the DS Graham Bowl. Just the last note there. The brothers will be on the court at the same time on Thursday at War Memorial Gym. All right, well, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to follow along on social media at Unofficial WCC Pod. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you on Saturday for the live.